Have you ever thought about when you'll die?
Perhaps a morbid question, but certainly one that warrants your curiosity. After all, knowing when to buy the life insurance your family's counting on can make a world of difference. It just so happens that death is never really a question of if, but when. Introducing Micromorts, the best method of quantifying the risk of death for a given activity. The micromort was first conceptualized in 1980 by Ronald A. Howard, and according to Google Trends, its usage has been consistent in both general interest and scientific studies for years. The micromort calculation takes the number of people who have died while performing an activity and divides it by the total number of times that activity was performed over the same time period.
So, if death by hot dog had a micromort value of 1 in every million people dies by hot dogs?
Not exactly. It could be the same person. One micromort says that for every million hot dogs that are thrown at a person or eaten or what have you, 1 on average will kill you. And that looks a little something like this.
I lived.
Further, the risk undertaken is better stated when the cause of death is specified. Hot dogs eaten or thrown or tripped over would have different micromort values in an ideal world. After all, if a medicine had a 50% death rate but was administered incorrectly 80% of the time, or even to the wrong demographic, how much does that tell you about the substance itself? I wrote a paper on this topic prior to recording, which you should totally still read, and I spent a long time talking about the office of the president. I'll put the doodles up here for a little bit because I'm proud of them. These points are all connected by how the micromort measurement can be misinterpreted. When stating a micromort value for a particular activity, you need to make sure to standardize that value to a time period, I prefer using days, that the time frame of the data is comparable to itself, and the data set of people is comparable to the population you want to extend it to. Remember, micromorts are used to find the number of people at risk. To bridge the gap between this value and raw mortality, you need to find out how often people undertake this risk. Converting hyper-frequent activities to daily risk is again one of the most common representations because it provides a common comparable unit that most people understand. And risk from existing is also measured in days, so the addition of all of these risks serve as a good baseline before incorporating periodic or less frequent risk. If you took Chem 1100 at my school this year, then you might recognize this chart. The levels themselves are not important. After all, neither the probability level nor the severity of the mishap are very formally defined. The trend that greater probability and severity will both individually increase the risk is the important part. Microlives, a similar but more recent concept, take into account this severity. Of course, most lifestyle decisions that you interact with on a daily basis will not outright kill you. Instead, they'll increase or decrease your lifespan, which can, of course, be represented with microlives, which are 30-minute stints of a predicted 57-year adult life. It does not account for the quality of life enjoyed by the subject, but it does represent a more immediate effect. Although a micromort is effectively 1/1,000,000th of a death, it does not mean that 1,000,000 accumulated micromorts kills you. A dice roll is independent each time, so even if your values seem high, you can take more than 1,000,000 micromorts before dying. However, most people are more constricted by age than by micromorts. A high risk in a single occurrence is much more risky than the same number of micromorts spread out over a period of time. However, micromorts, rather than microlives, are better applied by governmental fields because loss of life is easier to quantify than shreds of functional capability. The average American is willing to spend around $50 to avoid 1 micromort. In contrast, the Department of Transportation determines that if the price of saving each driver 1 micromort is more than the price of a Big Mac, they don't make the change. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention also use the same formula for micromorts and express them in these units in many of their findings for death rates of specific causes. This is because micromorts make it easy to estimate how many people are at risk and how that risk has changed over time. They are truly an applicable tool for evaluating any sudden death risk factor because they are simple, typically easy to attribute causes to a single adverse effect, and provide relevant information about the danger of a known activity. If you, like me, are a college freshman, you've just completed the safest period of your life. So as long as you avoid driving, alcohol, drugs, and homicide, the most common causes of death for teenagers, you won't get, as the cool kids say, clapped. Now, watch me tell off the Grim Reaper, because my lifestyle is so healthy.
I ate 36 celery sticks, I sleep well, and I exercise regularly. So, boom, or